Is your HOA always this fair? The gate creaked as two bored contractors hammered stakes into my driveway pretending the missing boundary pin was policy. They even blocked my truck and blasted out a tampering warning, the kind of email meant to mock you before you can defend yourself. But when I dropped my deed and Marcia pressed a paper stamp sharp under the porch glare, every line of their story collapsed under real evidence. Next week, the clubhouse sat silent beneath a county seal, its entire budget frozen in place. The first thing I heard was metal on stone. A sharp metallic clack, then another echoing off the front of my shop like someone was setting up camp where they shouldn't. I set my coffee down on the workbench and listened. The auger out back was still cold. Whatever was making that noise wasn't mine. The door chime jingled as I pushed it open. Cool October air slid in under my flannel. Maple Hollow was barely awake, mist hanging over the firs, one pickup rolling past on the county road. Two men I'd never seen before were standing in my gravel. They weren't looking at the street or the maples or the shop sign. They were hunched over the ground like it was a crime scene running a tape measure between stakes. One of them held a cheap plastic clipboard. The other was lining up a wooden stake exactly over the iron pin that marked my corner line, the same pin my dad set with a sledgehammer the summer I turned 16. My gravel stopped at that pin. Their boots did not. Morning, I called. The man with the clipboard glanced up just enough to clock me, then went back to reading. The other one raised the hammer. Careful with that, I said, walking down off the porch. The gravel crunched under my boots. You're standing on my side. He hesitated, stake poised. We're within the buffer zone, he said. It's all HOA turf. Funny, I said. The tax bill still shows my name. Up close, the clipboard was impossible to miss. The top sheet was stamped in block letters, Project Start, here 12/07, received 03/17. Under it, a printed map. A gray shadow, labeled Buffer Zone, washed right over my frontage like somebody had taken a highlighter to the line and decided it didn't matter anymore. A cardboard box of brackets sat half on my gravel, half on the strip of manicured sod that belonged to Lakeside Ridge Estates. Let's start over, I said. Who are you, and why are you measuring my driveway? The clipboard guy shifted his weight. 30s polo shirt with the HOA logo, a lanyard that probably made him feel official. Todd Becker, he said. Community manager. We're starting perimeter improvements along the secondary easement. Secondary. What I asked. He tapped the map with his pen. Here. This shaded area. That's the easement overlay. It's under HOA control for safety and visual continuity. I stared at the gray smear covering my property line. My deed doesn't say a word about a secondary easement, I said. It says my gravel goes right up to that iron pin. I pointed at it half buried where the hammer was hovering. Everything on this side of that pin is mine. Todd smiled the way people do when they've been trained not to blink. The board adopted updated perimeter standards this year, he said. All adjoining frontage is included in the buffer. You're adjacent, so your frontage falls under the overlay. That's not how property works, I said. You don't get to draw a bigger box just because your board doesn't like the look of my fence or lack of one. Behind him, the second worker, older, heavier, started dragging a bright orange string between two stakes. He planted them both inside my side of the pin. Hey, I said sharply, stepping closer, leave that line off my gravel. It's just a guide, the older man said. We're following marks from the HOA survey. I've seen the county's survey, I said. Those marks aren't theirs. They're mine. Todd adjusted the clipboard, flipping a page like we were in a meeting instead of my front yard. You can file any concerns with the board, he said. But right now, we're authorized to begin. We're protecting community assets. There have been concerns about trespassers cutting through your lot to reach the walking trail. Nobody's cutting through, I said, and even if they were, you don't fix that by trespassing yourself. He sighed, the put-upon kind. Mr. Dalton, I said. Ray. He nodded like he was writing me into a list somewhere. Mr. Dalton, I'm not here to argue legal theory. This is a standard perimeter project. Same fencing as the rest of Lakeside Ridge. It increases home values for everyone. That line doesn't run through my shop, I said. You've got your side, I've got mine. If you want to change that, you start at the county office, not with stakes and a rented auger at sunrise. He cocked his head toward the road where the HOA sign sat prettily under hanging baskets. The board has already done the due diligence, he said. We're within our rights. Then show me, I said. He frowned. Show you what? The part of HATAR 1207 that says you can drill holes on my parcel without a judge or a signature from me. He flipped the clipboard over as if the answer might be on the back of the paper. The sheet stayed blank, except for that stamp, received 0317, and a block of boilerplate. We don't carry the full bylaws to job sites, he said eventually. You can schedule a review appointment with the management office. The older worker cleared his throat. Todd, he said quietly. We're burning time here. Todd checked his watch. Start pulling the string, he said. We need posts in today. The older man sank another stake into my gravel wood, splitting the space where my dad and I knelt in the dust 3 decades ago. I stepped forward and knocked the stake sideways with my boot. Not hard, just enough to make it fall. Both men froze. Todd's face flushed. You can't interfere with a sanctioned project, he snapped. That's non-compliance. That, I said, nodding at the fallen stake, is my land saying no. The older man's hand hovered over the auger's pull cord. Todd, he asked. Todd's jaw worked. He looked at the iron pin at the buffer zone smear on his paper back at me. You're making this more difficult than it needs to be, he said. The fence is going in. You can either cooperate or you can fight it after the concrete sets. If you control the line, I said quietly, you control the man. He blinked. I'm not here to control anyone, he said. I'm here to enforce standards. On your side of the line, I said, not mine. He spun toward the crew voice, sharp. Fire it up, he ordered. Drill the first hole. The older man yanked the cord. The auger coughed, then roared to life, bit spinning like a silver screw. He lined it up exactly where the stake had been inches inside the invisible plane that separated my world from theirs. Don't, I said. He drove the teeth down. Gravel jumped. The bit chewed into my soil, shaving away the edge of the hole until it kissed the iron pin. Dust and stones spat up around it. The one thing that had marked my boundary for 40 years disappeared under a swirl of churned earth swallowed without ceremony by a project number and a board vote I'd never seen. They thought that gray smear on their map could erase what that pin meant. They were wrong. By the time sunlight hit the shop wall, the damage was already drying. 6 posts, thick, straight, and wrapped in stiff forms, stood in a jagged gray row across the edge of my gravel. The concrete around their bases was still wet enough to shine, but firm enough to hold. They blocked half my driveway like someone had taken a ruler to my life and decided to redraw the morning without asking. I stepped closer. The air smelled of lime and cold cement. A thin line of water still trickled toward the road. Whoever had poured the mix hadn't bothered to smooth the spill. They hadn't bothered with much of anything except making sure it cured on my side. A black SUV eased to a stop near the posts. The HOA crest on the door glinted like a badge. Linda Harper stepped out, president of Lakeside Ridge Estates, or self-appointed queen depending on who you asked. Navy coat hair perfect folder tucked under her arm with the confidence of someone used to holding final answers. Mr. Dalton, she said, smiling the way people smile before they ask for money. I wanted to check on the installation. Installation, I repeated. That what you're calling this? We're enhancing perimeter safety, she said. The board voted last month. She walked right up to the nearest post, tapping the hardening concrete with her boot toe. These will provide a visually consistent and secure boundary for everyone entering Lakeside Ridge. I'm not entering Lakeside Ridge, I said. I live here. This isn't your boundary. You're adjacent, she replied. That's part of our entrance corridor. We want it uniform. Todd Becker showed up a second later, tablet in hand. He didn't meet my eyes. Morning, he muttered. I ignored him and looked at Linda. You poured on my side again, right over the iron pin. She opened her folder. A blueprint slid out crisp and heavy. She pressed it flat on the hood of her SUV so the sun could hit it. "This is Phase 2, she said. "See here." A thick bar labeled Phase 2. Westward extension stretched bold across the page. It didn't skirt my property line. It swallowed it. The buffer zone shaded in gray rolled right over my frontage like my deed had been a suggestion. "Where'd you get county approval for this?" I asked. "The documentation is filed," she said. "Everything was reviewed. Reviewed by who I pressed. Not my parcel clerk. We followed proper procedure." "That's not an answer." Todd cleared his throat. "Ray, it's standard. Everyone on the west side is getting the same upgrade." "I'm not on your west side," I said. "I'm on my side." Linda sighed, annoyed at how long it was taking. "Mr. Dalton, no one is trying to cause tension. You'll barely notice the fence once it's up. I noticed it this morning when I couldn't move my truck." She closed the folder. "We're proceeding this afternoon with panel installation. Please don't interfere. The curing concrete is fragile and we can't be responsible if you damage the improvement." "Improvement," I said. "That what we're calling trespass now?" "Call it what you like," Linda said, stepping back toward her SUV. "The board has authority, and you think saying it makes it true." She gave me a thin smile that said she'd already stopped listening. "Enjoy your day, Mr. Dalton." They drove off. I stood in the gravel a long minute staring at the posts marching across the edge of my driveway like a quiet accusation. The laminated plat map hung inside on the shop wall glowing under the overhead light. I went in, pulled it down, and laid it beside my deed. The black boundary line was still there. So was the county seal. So was my name. Nothing on that map matched the bold fantasy line Linda had shown me. I snapped photos of everything: the deed, the plat, the fresh concrete, the pin half buried in gray. I didn't know what the next step was, but I knew I needed someone who spoke the language Linda pretended to speak. I drove to town. Marcia Ellison's office sat above the old hardware store second-floor glass door, etched with Ellison and Bray property and land use. She'd helped me once before on a contractor dispute. She was sharp, the kind of sharp that didn't need raising her voice. She looked up when I walked in. "Ray, haven't seen you in a while. Wish it were a social visit," I said. The conference table smelled faintly of toner and legal pads. I spread the photos out. She adjusted her glasses, studying each image, then the plat, then the deed. "Tell me everything," she said, and I did. The posts, the blueprint, the phrase "county approved," and the bold Phase 2 line cutting through my gravel like it owned the place. Marcia tapped the plat map with her pen. "This is the only boundary that matters," she said. "There's no recorded secondary easement, no shared frontage, no overlay. They're outside their authority. So what do?" I asked. "You don't touch those posts," she said. "Not 1 inch. They're in my way." "Good," she said. "Let them keep making mistakes in plain view. Every bit of this is evidence. You move it, you give them room to argue. Let the facts sit exactly where they chose to put them." She leaned back thinking. "We'll pull the county file," she said. "I want to see what they actually submitted. If they misrepresented the boundary, that's where we start." I looked at the photos again. The concrete looked harder than it had an hour ago, pale at the edges. So I wait. "For now," she said. "Ray, don't fight concrete with a crowbar, fight it with ink." Outside, the posts stood stiff and gray, curing fast. So was my resolve. Tea early. Rain ticked against the shop windows when my phone buzzed on the bench. I wiped dust off my fingers and woke the screen. Boundary safety upgrade, community notice. They'd attached a photo of my driveway. My truck sat boxed in by the new post's concrete collars dark from yesterday's pour. Caption: "New protective fencing provides enhanced safety for residents entering Lakeside Ridge." They'd turned what they did to my land into advertising. Outside, the door chime jingled as I stepped onto the porch. The air smelled like wet gravel. The posts cut a hard line across my frontage. A small camera had appeared on the end post nearest the corner. Black plastic bolted at eye level, aimed straight at my shop door. A tiny red LED blinked when I moved. I walked up until my reflection filled the lens. "Morning," I said to the little red eye. It blinked. My phone buzzed again. "Violation notice. potential tampering risk. The second email talked about recent instances of property owners interfering with HOA-approved safety structures. No names, but the attached photo showed my boots next to a post zoomed in and grainy. Any alteration, obstruction, or removal of perimeter fencing, it read, will be logged as a safety violation and may result in enforcement action. They put concrete on my soil, pointed a camera at my door, and warned me not to touch a thing. I forwarded both emails to Marcia with one line, "You still want me to leave this alone," and pocketed the phone. Rain beaded on my jacket as I walked down the drive. Cars slowed, eyes flicking between the posts and me. Neighbors who used to wave now looked straight ahead. Mrs. Keene came along the shoulder with her beagle hood up. She glanced at the camera, then at me. "Morning," I said. "Morning," she answered. "You get the notice I asked?" "They sent it to everyone," she said. "Said your stretch was the first upgrade." "Lucky me," I said. "They say kids cut through here after dark," she added. "Fence is for safety." "You ever seen kids cut through?" I asked. She hesitated. "No, but the emails can say anything I said. Maps don't." She tugged the dog away. Back near the corner, the ground was slick. I knelt by the spot where the iron pin should have been. My dad and I set it there when I was 16. I could find it by feel. I raked the gravel aside with my hand. No metal, just gray smear. I dug deeper, fingers scraping wet grit. Still nothing. The concrete, feathered all the way to the edge, smoothed like someone had taken a trowel across it to hide any break in the surface. The pin wasn't buried. It was gone. I stood, knees complaining. Rain drummed on the siding and the camera above. Footsteps approached. "Lose something." Ray Todd stood on the pavement under a black umbrella, HOA badge peeking from his jacket, coffee in his hand. "Iron pin was right here," I said. "You stepped around it yesterday." He took a sip, eyes drifting over the gravel without landing. "Are you sure about that?" he asked. "People misremember where old pins sit, especially when things change." "I'm sure," I said. "We set that pin with a sledge and a string line. It hasn't moved." He shrugged. "Survey marks get lost. Lines get updated. That's what the board's maps are for." "The board's maps don't move steel," I said. "Somebody pulled that pin." A missing stake is never an accident. He let out a small breath. "What matters is what's on file downtown," he said. "The county looks at recorded plans, not stories about where a rod used to be. The county looks at the record," I said, "and the record has my name on this side of the line." Todd shifted the umbrella, staring past me at the shop. "You got the tampering notice," he said. "For your own sake, don't mess with the fence. Cameras are for everyone's safety, including yours." "I've felt safer," I said. He checked his watch. "We'll be back with panels," he said. "Just let the project finish. You'll adjust." He walked off toward the entrance. The camera above me blinked its red dot, patient. They'd sent their glossy email, aimed their lens, and plucked the one piece of steel that made the boundary hard to deny. They weren't just pouring concrete anymore. They were seeing how easy it would be to pull me off the map and call it safety. The new notice landed in my inbox before the coffee finished brewing. Subject violation notice. Tampering pending. I scrolled with my thumb, reading it twice just to make sure I hadn't missed a day somewhere. Lakeside Ridge Estates has received reports of potential tampering with perimeter safety structures adjacent to your property, it said. This notice serves as preliminary documentation of a possible safety violation. Further action may be taken if behavior continues or escalates. I hadn't touched their fence. I hadn't gone near their concrete except to photograph it from my side of the line. They were writing a story with me as the villain and leaving blanks for whatever ending they wanted. The kitchen table was already buried in paper utility bill supply, invoices, my father's old permits, and plastic sleeves he'd insisted we keep. I set my phone down among them and looked at the mess. If they wanted this on paper, we'd put it on paper, properly. I printed every email, boundary safety upgrade, potential tampering risk, and now this latest tampering pending masterpiece. The printer groaned, spitting out their words in black and white. I added my photos of the posts, the missing iron pin, the camera pointed at my door. I slipped them into a worn folder, the same one I'd used when my dad transferred the shop to my name. An hour later, I was back across from Marcia in her office. The rain had followed me tracking into the foyer on my boots. She slid my folder toward herself and started laying the pages out in order. Emails on the left, photos in the middle, plat and deed on the right. She didn't rush. She read every line. "They're building a file," she said finally. "They want to be able to say you're unstable or non-compliant before you walk into a room and speak for yourself." "Can they do that?" I asked. She looked up. "They can write anything they want in a board email," she said, "but once it hits the county docket, it has to live next to facts." She reached for a fresh document sitting in her own stack. The top was stamped in red demand letter, filed, sent. She turned it so I could read. "This went out certified this morning," she said, "to the HOA's registered agent and the board. We're formally alleging fence encroachment and removal of a recorded boundary marker. We're demanding they cease all further construction on your frontage and provide proof of any county approval they claim to have." I read the first paragraph. There was my name, my parcel number, the words unlawful encroachment and boundary interference in clean, measured language. "What happens if they ignore it?" I asked. Marcia capped her pen. "Paper doesn't yell," she said. "It just waits for a judge." She dug into another folder and pulled out a thin printout stapled crooked. The HOA letterhead sat at the top. Beneath it, internal brief. Board strategy. "Where'd you get that?" I asked. "Public records request," she said. They attached it to a packet for the county, and the clerk's office coughed it up. She pointed to a line in the middle. "Ray Dalton potential legal threat. Document early non-compliance establish pattern prior to any hearing." I felt my jaw tighten. "So, that's the game," I said. "Call me a problem until it sticks." "That's the attempt," she said. "The demand letter puts a pin in it. From now on, any move they make goes into a record we control as much as they do." By the time I left, the clouds had lowered. The clubhouse sat just inside the Lakeside Ridge entrance, lights on and parking lot fuller than usual. A banner hung over the doors. "Open Community Safety Forum." I pulled into the gravel shoulder across from it and watched people file in, neighbors with folded arms and tight mouths. Mrs. Keene. The Keplers from the corner lot. A few faces I barely knew. On the clubhouse bulletin board by the entrance, a fresh flyer had been pinned up. I could see my driveway in the photo from across the street, the posts front and center. "New protective fencing enhances safety near high-risk frontage." The caption read, "High risk." That was me now. I walked in anyway. The clubhouse smelled like stale coffee and carpet cleaner. Folding chairs were arranged in neat rows. Linda stood at the front with Todd and another board member. A big foam core map of Lakeside Ridge was propped on an easel. "We've already had pushback," she was saying when I slipped into the back row. "Some owners don't understand how critical these upgrades are, but we can't let individual resistance jeopardize community safety." Eyes turned, following the invisible line from her words, to the only guy in the room wearing work boots and a flannel instead of athleisure. "We've logged several incidents of aggressive behavior near the new fencing," Linda continued. "Our manager and volunteers have felt unsafe. We're documenting everything for our records." Her eyes flicked over me once bland and steady before moving on. Todd hovered by the sidewall, tablet in hand. He didn't look my way, but the vein in his neck twitched. Someone asked about costs. Someone else asked why their email mentioned incident reports if nothing had happened. Linda used words like liability and exposure, painting shadows around my driveway without saying my name. When it was over, people filtered out in clusters, talking in low voices. Nobody met my eyes. Evan, the retired survey tech from 3 streets over, leaned against the far wall with his hands in his pockets, watching it all like a man taking mental measurements. Our eyes met for half a second. He gave a small nod, then looked away. I drove home to a new line of mail in my inbox. HOA, thank you for attending our safety forum. HOA, follow-up, perimeter incident log. And then one from Todd. He must have meant to send it to someone else. The subject line just said, RE Demand Letter. The body was 2 sentences. If he escalates, we escalate. Don't back off now. I read it twice, then 3 times. The timestamp lined up with the end of the meeting. He'd hit my address instead of whoever he meant by habit or hurry. They weren't just circling the wagons, they were planning the next move. Another notification slid across my screen before I could decide what to forward to Marcia first. Unknown number. Meet me at the diner. Don't tell anyone, it's about the fence. And the money. The Maple Hollow Diner was almost empty when I walked in. 1 truck at the corner, 1 sedan out front, rain streaking the windows. Inside, the overhead lights buzzed faintly, casting a tired yellow over the cracked vinyl booths. Coffee smell, fryer oil, and something sweet from the pie case mixed in the air. Evan sat in the back booth, the one under the humming neon beer sign. He had his cap pulled low and a manila folder in front of him, hands resting on either side like he was guarding it. Patty, the waitress, caught my eye. "Hey, Ray," she said. "Same as usual." "Yeah," I said. "Coffee first." She poured before I even sat down. Evan didn't speak until she walked away. He slid the folder across the table, slow and deliberate. "You didn't get this from me," he said. The paper was warm from his hands. I opened the flap. First page. Operating budget. Unauthorized adjustments. A yellow sticky note clung to the corner in neat block letters. Ask about Phase 2 funds. "Where'd you get this?" I asked quietly. Evan's eyes flicked toward the window, then back. "I used to check boundary surveys for the county," he said. "They roped me into the finance committee last year. Figured gray hair meant I wouldn't ask questions." He tapped the folder. They were wrong. I looked down at the lines of numbers. Columns for reserve funds, maintenance, legal costs, and something else Phase 2. Capital allocation. "Start on page 3, Evan said. Look for acquisition model." I flipped. There it was, Phase 2, acquisition model. Rows of parcels ran down the sheet, lot numbers, owner names, notes. One line was highlighted in orange. Parcel 1907B166, Dalton, R. Note, boundary, adjustment, target. West approach. My throat went dry. "What am I looking at?" I asked. "A problem," Evan said. "For them. If you let it be." Patty dropped off my coffee. "You boys need menus?" she asked. "We're good," Evan said. "Just coffee." "Thanks." She moved on. He leaned closer. Last winter, he said, keeping his voice low. Linda pushed through a pool renovation and a fancy gate system for the clubhouse. She overspent. Way overspent. Insurance went up. Reserves went down. People started grumbling about special assessments. I scanned the adjustment column. Several entries had notes deferred, shifted, covered by temp credit. Next to mine, the Phase 2 line had a number circled. "How much?" I asked. "Enough, they can't admit they blew it," he said. They planned Phase 2 as a way to make it look like all that concrete and steel was part of a long-term perimeter upgrade. If they could slap a fence across your frontage and say it was always meant to be community property, they could wrap the cost into shared improvements. "And my land," I asked. "Becomes common buffer," he said. "No refund, no apology, just a new line on paper." I turned the page. A spreadsheet printout showed projected recovery. Under Phase 2, West Approach, another orange highlight. Projected offset, 82% of deficit over 3 years. Dalton frontage adjustment, if the numbers don't fit. Evan said quietly, "Someone pushes the line." I let out a slow breath. "So this isn't about kids cutting through," I said. "It's about patching a budget hole." "Exactly," he said. "Your gravel is their bandage. They figured you'd grumble, maybe stomp around, but in the end you'd live with it because fighting takes time and money." "Maybe they misjudged," I said. He snorted. "They did. They also forgot the county scanner still coughs up more than it should. That ledger was attached to a reimbursement request they filed 3 weeks ago. They thought nobody outside the board would ever read the notes." I closed the folder halfway, feeling the weight of the paper. "This enough for court?" I asked. "It's enough to ask hard questions," he said. "Enough to make their lawyers sweat. You tie this to that missing pin and those emails calling you a threat, and it doesn't look like safety anymore. It looks like a scheme." Patty topped off the coffee without asking. The neon sign above us flickered. "You sure you want to be mixed up in this?" I asked him. "They'll come after whoever leaked it." "I didn't leak anything," Evan said. "Just happened to find some papers in a public file and share them with a neighbor over coffee." He held my gaze. "Besides, I'm not the one they're trying to erase off the map." I slid the folder fully back in front of me. "I'm taking this straight to my legal team," I said. The words felt strange in my mouth, heavier than my lawyer. But it was true now. This wasn't just me and a clipboard anymore. It was me, Marcia, and whoever she brought with her. Evan nodded. "Good. Because if you sue, everything collapses for them. The Phase 2 story falls apart, the budget games come out, and the board starts looking a lot less like volunteers and a lot more like people who cooked the books. You think the neighbors will care?" I asked. "Most of them seem happy enough with the idea of safety upgrades." "They'll care when they see where their dues went," he said. "They'll care when they realize the same people lecturing them about community standards are playing games with their money." I tucked the folder under my arm. Outside, the rain had thinned to a mist. The diner sign buzzed overhead as I stepped into the lot. My phone buzzed again before I reached the truck. "Marcia. We got their lawyer's move, and it's ugly." Another bubble appeared before I could respond. "Call me as soon as you're alone." Rain slid down the office windows in thin, uneven trails, tapping the glass with the insistence of a clock I couldn't shut off. Marcia dropped a fresh printout onto the table between us. There she said, "They made their move." Across the top of the PDF, bold and centered, sat the title, "Encroachment Clarification Pending Compliance Audit." I scanned the text. Every line felt like a shove. "Mr. Dalton may not fully understand the documented overlay boundaries," I read aloud. "Board requests a compliance audit to determine encroachment responsibility." I set the paper down. "They're accusing me of misunderstanding my own land." "They're laying groundwork," Marcia said. "If they can paint you as confused or careless, everything that follows gets easier for them." A knock sounded at the door. Marcia called, "Come in." A man in a slate-gray suit stepped inside carrying a laptop under one arm and a thick folder under the other. Early 50s quiet eyes posture of someone who lived in spreadsheets and court calendars. Ray Marcia said, "This is Daniel Shaw, Forensic Accounting. He's joining your legal team for the hearing." Daniel shook my hand. "I've been reviewing the HOA's filings," he said. "They're messy, very messy." He set his folder down and opened it. Rows of printed spreadsheets stared back at me, highlighted and marked in neat pen strokes. "You've seen the Phase 2 budget before," he said, flipping to a specific page. "But you haven't seen it with actual numbers reconciled." He tapped the orange highlighted row. "Your parcel, their so-called boundary adjustment target, is how they plan to shore up missing reserve funds. Without it, the budget collapses." "So the fence isn't about safety," I said. "It's about covering a mistake." "It's about covering a series of mistakes," Daniel replied. "Overspending, reallocations, emergency maintenance they didn't have money for. They needed an asset to fold into the ledger. Your frontage is that asset." I felt heat rise in my neck. "And now they're auditing me. They're trying to preempt your claim by framing theirs first," Marcia said. "But tonight changes that." "What exactly is tonight?" I asked. Marcia folded her hands. "The HOA administrative hearing. They requested it, which locks them into statements they can't walk back. It's not a courtroom, but it's recorded. And once something is recorded, it's evidence." Daniel added, "We want them talking, especially about that missing boundary pin. They'll try to gloss over it. But the ledger ties their motives directly to that line." Marcia stood. "Grab your coat. We need to get there early." Rain followed us all the way to Lakeside Ridge. The clubhouse lights glowed pale and official against the dusk. A white sheet of paper was taped to the glass door. "Admin hearing. 6:30 p.m. Board and affected party only." Inside, folding chairs had been lined in 2 rows. A long table faced them with 3 nameplates: Linda Harper, Board President; Todd Becker, Manager; Paula Mathers, Treasurer. Todd flipped through a binder as if the right page might save him. Linda stared at the gavel she'd set in front of herself like she'd been waiting her whole life to use it. Marcia placed her bag on the smaller table across from them. Daniel spread the ledger pages between us like a quiet arsenal. I sat, hands folded, heartbeat steady but heavy. Evan was already there in the second row, cap low and jacket zipped. He gave me one small nod. Linda cleared her throat and began. This hearing is to clarify boundary concerns near the west approach. The board has received reports of hostility, non-cooperation, and potential tampering from the adjacent property owner, Mr. Dalton. I felt Daniel glance at me, but I said nothing. Linda continued with phrases like community safety, consistency of visual standards, interpretive overlays, each one sounding like she'd practiced in the mirror. When she finished, Marcia waited an extra beat before speaking. For the record, she said, her voice calm, the property owner disputes every premise you've just presented. And before we go further, this was filed and sent prior to your audit notice. She placed the demand letter on the table, the red filed sent stamp unmistakable. Todd leaned forward. We're addressing that now. No, Marcia said. You're trying to redefine it. That's different. Daniel lifted the ledger page and turned it outward. The orange highlight glowed under the fluorescent light. This internal financial model, he said, labels Mr. Dalton's parcel as a deficit offset. 82% of Phase 2's budget shortfall hinges on converting his land. Paula's pen froze mid-tap. That's not relevant, Todd said sharply. We acted within our authority. Marcia placed a photo beside the ledger, the posts, the smooth concrete, the empty patch where the iron pin should have stood. Then explain where his boundary pin went, she said. Todd's mouth opened, then shut. Linda shifted papers without looking at them. Rain ticked against the windows. The silence stretched thin. Then scrape. A chair moved in the second row. Evan stood slowly. We need to talk about the money, he said. The room had gone so still you could hear the projector humming behind the folding table. Evan's hands shook as he stepped forward, cap in one hand, a stack of papers in the other. I have documents, he said, voice trembling but clear, the board never approved. A ripple of whispers spread across the clubhouse. Chairs creaked. Someone in the back muttered, What documents? Linda shot to her feet. Evan, sit down. She snapped, her tone suddenly sharper than any gavel she could have slammed. He didn't move. Todd stepped between him and the projector, shoulders squared like he intended to block the screen with his entire body. This isn't part of tonight's agenda, he said. Any materials being presented must be pre-cleared with the board. It's relevant, Evan said. More relevant than anything we've heard tonight. Residents had begun filing in as the rain slowed outside. Some had come out of curiosity, others because the hearing wasn't as private as the board hoped. Now they lined the walls, murmuring, watching the standoff unfold. Marcia rose from our table. He's a resident, she said. He has standing. Move. Todd didn't, but Evan, hands still shaking, sidestepped him and placed a USB drive on the table beside the projector. Turn it on, he told the clerk. Please. The clerk, a young woman who looked like she regretted volunteering tonight, glanced between Linda and Todd. Then she swallowed hard and plugged the drive in. The projector flickered to life, throwing a spreadsheet onto the wall. Rows and columns, numbers, notes. At the top, Phase 2 acquisition model. The room went silent again. Different this time. A held breath. A low tension winding up, waiting to snap. Evan took a shaky breath. Page 2, he said. The clerk clicked. The screen shifted. My parcel, 1907B, 1 on 16, was highlighted in orange, the exact shade Evan had shown me at the diner. The note beside it glowed like a warning flare. Boundary adjustment, target west approach. Projected offset, 82% of deficit. The whispers turned sharp. They tried to annex him. Someone gasped. That's why the fence. They used his land to fix their mess. Todd's voice cracked. "This is internal draft material. It's not... It's marked final," Evan said, lifting a printed email above his head. "Right here, sent by Treasurer Mathers to the board distribution list. Dated 6 weeks before Phase 2 began." Paula. "Mathers." The treasurer blanched. That wasn't meant for... She stopped when she realized what she'd almost admitted. Linda slammed her binder shut, the sound echoing across the room like a door being kicked. "You are out of line," she hissed. "These documents are confidential." "They were sent to the county in a reimbursement packet," Evans said. "Public record. Anyone could have found them. I just happened to be the one who did." A man in the back row, gray-beard denim jacket, stood. "So, you overspent," he said, then tried to cover it by pushing Ray's boundary line inward and calling it safety. "That is not accurate," Linda snapped. Marcia stepped forward. "Clerk," she said, "enter all submitted documents into the minutes. The ledger, the email, and the spreadsheet. All of it." Todd barked. "This hearing is not a deposition. Then stop acting like you're hiding evidence," Marcia said. She turned to the room. "Everything presented tonight now becomes part of the official administrative record." More residents had pressed forward from the hallway drawn in by the raised voices. Rainwater dripped from jackets onto the clubhouse carpet. Faces strained for a view of the glowing orange highlight on the wall. "Truth doesn't need volume," Evan said softly. "Just light." A woman near the front let out a shaky exhale. "They really were going to take his frontage," she whispered. "It wasn't taking," Linda said tightly. "It was an adjustment. To cover a deficit," Daniel said, pointing to the bottom column. "A deficit caused by fiscal mismanagement you tried to bury." Paula finally broke. "We never approved that model," she blurted. "We never voted on it. I didn't even Evan raise the email again. Then, why is it marked final? Why were there margin notes from every board member? Why did you project 3 years of recovery from an asset that isn't yours?" Paula's face went slack. Todd rounded on her. "You said you vetted those numbers." "I vetted the first version," she said. "Not this one." The room erupted accusations, questions, angry mutters. They lied. They used dues to hide it. What else are they burying? Linda lifted her binder again like she might throw it. "Enough," she snapped. "Fine. You want everything on record. You'll get it in writing." Then she slammed the binder shut a second time, deliberate final, and sat rigidly, jaw clenched, like she'd bitten down on steel. The room buzzed with outrage. But beneath it, something colder settled over the clubhouse. For the first time all night, the board looked outnumbered and exposed. The certified envelope felt heavier than paper had any right to be. The mail carrier handed it to me with a quiet, "Good luck, Ray," before stepping off my porch. The seal was still warm from the sorting machine edges pressed flat with the kind of precision only a courthouse uses. Marcia stood beside my truck, arms folded, eyes fixed on me as I opened it. "Read it," she said. I slid out the folded page. A bold header stared back, HOA financial audit. Immediate seizure ordered. I looked up at her. She didn't smile. She didn't need to. "Ray," she said, voice low, steady. The judge seized their entire operating budget. Wind brushed through the pines behind us, cool and sharp. For the first time in weeks, the air felt clear enough to breathe all the way down. Across the yard, the county inspector paced near the gravel edge, kneeling every few steps to study the ground. A can of bright orange marking paint dangled from his belt. "Found it," he called. Marcia and I walked over. He pointed to a small hollow gap in the dirt barely wider than my thumb, exactly where the iron pin had stood for decades. "Empty," he said. "And the soil displacement matches mechanical removal, not erosion." He straightened, brushing dirt off his jeans. "This is the basis for the order. Pin removed during HOA construction activity equals boundary interference. The county can't ignore that." He lifted the spray can and marked a clean straight line across the gravel, an unmistakable orange streak, returning the boundary to where my father had set it 40 years ago. "You'll want pictures," he added. I already had my phone out. By the time we reached the clubhouse, a small crowd had formed, residents holding umbrellas, arms crossed, faces tight. A yellow county notice was taped to the double doors, its seal stamped deep enough to leave an imprint. The inspector stepped forward, reading from the transcript he carried. Boundary pin removed during HOA activity. Non-compliant, he began his voice carrying across the parking lot. Fence placement determined to encroach onto private parcel 19-07B 116. Unauthorized expenditures and undisclosed allocations identified in Phase 2 acquisition model. Linda stood near the steps, jaw-stiff binder clutched to her chest like a shield. Todd hovered beside her, hands buried in his pockets, eyes lowered. The inspector continued, flipping to the final page. County order. The entire HOA operating budget is hereby seized into a trustee-controlled escrow pending full audit. No expenditures authorized. No construction permitted. No use of funds allowed until review is complete. Someone in the crowd let out a sound half gasp, half laugh. "You lied," a woman shouted at the board. "You spent our money." Another voice rose behind her. "You tried to take his land to fix your books." A man pointed toward me. "You thought nobody would say anything. You thought you could bury it." Todd finally looked up. "This isn't fair," he muttered. Marcia stepped closer, tone measured but cutting. "Fair is the boundary your crew tore out. Fair is the budget you hollowed to hide it." Linda tried to speak, but the words tangled in her throat. We acted." "No," a resident interrupted. "You acted for yourselves." Then it happened quiet at first. A single clap. Slow. Deliberate. An older man near the front, white hair tucked under a baseball cap, clapped again. Finally, someone fought back, he said. More hands joined. A few, then many. The sound rose sharp and echoing under the clubhouse overhang. Not applause for me. Applause for the line finally drawn. Linda's shoulders sagged. Todd stepped aside, defeated, as if the weight of the budget order had taken the fight out of him. The inspector taped another notice to the door, sealing the building shut until escrow transfer. We walked back toward my property, the orange line glowing bright against the damp gravel. County trucks pulled in behind us with tool racks and marking flags. 2 workers carried equipment toward the fence posts, pausing only long enough to confirm the new line before beginning removal. 1 post at a time, they loosened the brackets, lifted the beams, and freed each piece of lumber from the soil. No drama. No shouting. Just steady work, undoing what never should have been done. I waited at the original pin location, the small gap still visible in the dirt. The inspector handed me the replacement marker, a cold iron rod, weighty, honest. Exactly like the one my father had hammered into the ground the summer he finished building the shop. "Yours to set," he said quietly. I knelt, settled the pin over the narrow hole, and tapped it down with a mallet until it stood firm, straight, certain, undeniable. The sound echoed across the yard, sharp as a judge's strike. Behind me, the crew lifted the final fence post, carrying it back across the line that had always been mine. When I stood, Marcia looked at the iron gleaming in the afternoon light. "There it is," she said. "Restored." I exhaled long and steady. A line defended once becomes a line no one tests again.